I have the distinct honor and pleasure of introducing a man who basically needs no or very little introduction. He is a man that is a true Canadian, having been born and raised in the great city of Sudbury. He is a man of many, many talents, many skills, many different roles that he has played. Not only is he a scholar, having 3 degrees, he has also either taught or attended at Harvard, Cambridge, Queen's, University of Toronto, Western, McGill. Now, I'm not sure, sir, whether or not that's because you couldn't hold a job or just because you just really, like to move around a lot. But in any case, you can tell by the fact that he has attended so many universities, his academic career is unbelievable. He has 17 honorary degrees. He has authored numerous publications. He's also been an administrator, having been president of the University of Waterloo. He's also been a moderator. One of the things that he moderated that I was quite excited to hear about is he moderated the first TV leaders debate with Pierre Elliott Trudeau, Joe Clark, and Ed Broadbent. I can only imagine what fun that was. He's also a farmer, having a horse training ranch until very recently called Chatterbox Farm. I'm not sure if one of your 5 daughters named it, but it's a lovely name. He is a husband to his high school sweetheart, Sharon. He is a father to 5 daughters and a grandfather to 8 grandkids. In fact, I think he is affectionately known as Grandpa Book. He is an athlete, having played hockey from a very early age. In fact, for those of you in the room that may be of the same vintage as I am, you may have seen Love Story, and you'll know that the author of Love Story, Eric Segal, in fact was a jogging partner of His Excellency, and one of the characters in Love Story, Captain Davy, is actually patterned after and named after His Excellency. He's a half marathoner, and to many of our shame, I suppose, he earlier this year at the age of 70, and I'm not being rude, everyone knows what his age is, so at the age of 70 he did a half marathon. So it's amazing to be able to do that at this age, and he's a real inspiration to many of us. Most importantly, he is a builder of Canada. He is committed to building our great nation, city by city, town by town, neighborhood by neighborhood. And hopefully he'll talk a little bit about the whole concept of barn raising. And if we didn't love him for all of that, he's also an avid supporter of the charitable and not-for-profit sector. One of his pillars, in fact, while he is the Governor General, is on volunteerism and philanthropy. When I was sitting waiting for His Excellency, I had the opportunity to talk to Bill Pashby, who's from the Agora Foundation. He told me a very quick little story about when he was at the University of Toronto, and His Excellency was a law professor there. Like many professors, you often say to your students, "Oh, call me at home anytime, not a problem." And I guess Bill did give him a call one evening, and his wife Sharon answered the phone, and her comment was, "Well, he'll have to call you back because he's in the backyard flooding the rink for our kids to skate." Now, if that doesn't epitomize a true Canadian, I'm not sure what does. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you a man who will not, cannot, has not ever failed, the 28th Governor General of Canada, His Excellency, the Honourable David Johnston.
Hey, thank you very much. With respect to not being able to hold a job, it's worse than that. It's just one step ahead of the sheriff. Marcel, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I feel I'm with kindred souls. I feel so excited to be here with you and part of this great cause. And what a manifestation of Canada we've just had. That wonderful poem recited by Nathaniel, Defying Failure, and done in our 2 official languages so beautifully. What a statement of this country. Last night I was reading a new biography of George and Pauline Vanier by Mary Frances Cody, a beautiful book. And George Vanier was the product of a bilingual family. His father's name, of course, was Vanier. His mother was Donnelly. Pauline, it was Pauline Archer. Her father was Charles Archer, a judge of the Quebec Superior Court, and her mom was from the de Salaberry family, the family whose great hero led the Canadian troops in the 1812 Battle of Chateauguay. And I was so conscious of the Vanier family as I was reading this book, because one of the many moving moments in my life was one evening in Montreal when their son, Jean Vanier, received the Royal Bank Award for his work with the handicapped adults, l'Arche community in Paris, where he for decades has been looking after severely handicapped adults. And the ballroom was filled with 1,000 people or so for the Royal Bank Award. And amongst the people, there were perhaps 75 or 100 severely handicapped adults enjoying this marvelous evening. And to close it, one of the adults who was very severely disabled came to the podium and recited the l'Arche prayer, about 4 minutes, without a note, with enormous struggle. And at the end of it, he burst out into tears. The effort was so great. There was not a dry eye in that entire auditorium, including the tycoons of St. James Street. And I thought, what a wonderful Canadian moment that was. Let me begin by acknowledging the hard work of everyone here who has helped to create one of the strongest and one of the best nonprofit sectors in the world today. You are, in a word, inspiring, or in my grandchildren's words, something awesome. I especially want to thank Marcel, President and CEO of Imagine Canada, for giving me this opportunity to speak, but for giving the leadership to this great organization, Imagine, as you have. Under his leadership, Imagine has become a leading organization not only in research, but also in innovative ideas for nonprofits. And Faye mentioned that in my installation speech about 14 months ago, which was entitled A Smart and Caring Nation, A Call to Service. Both adjectives are important, a smart and caring nation, a call to service. There were 3 pillars. One was philanthropy and volunteerism. The second was family and children. And the third was learning and innovation. And innovation is about smartness. And of course, caring is what we're all about here. And how do we combine the smartness with the caring to build an even better nation in the future? I made it a mission during my time as Governor General to speak about the importance of volunteerism and philanthropy in our communities. All of you here are dedicated individuals who long ago came to the conclusion that for society to evolve, for communities to thrive, we must take an active role. If we see a problem in our community, we should go and do what we can to solve it. Just finished reading the past couple of days the report of the UN Development Agency on volunteerism and the year of the volunteer. And I was so struck by the very simple index of healthy communities can also demonstrate a healthy volunteer sector, and unhealthy communities have an unhealthy volunteer sector. It's a very trite observation, but it's so true. And if we go through sections of any city, you see those two in relationship. If you go to any province in the country, you see those two in relationship. And if you look at a nation as a whole, you see those two in relationship. So the volunteer spirit and the effort to act on that, of course, is what creates healthy and prosperous and civic communities. Let me tell you a story. Last year, I was privileged to meet with representatives from Pathways to Education Canada in Toronto. Participants, volunteers, and administrators all spoke of how Pathways had impacted their lives. To give you an idea, the goal of the Pathways program is to ensure that all youth, regardless of their social or economic situation or where they were born, have the same opportunity for academic success. And this success cannot be denied. Working alongside the school system and through the effort of dedicated volunteers, dropout rates have plummeted from 56% to 12%. 80% of the graduates attend college or university. That's a remarkable achievement, from 56% to 12% with the students who were enrolled in Pathways. These results come from Regent Park, its first site, and has led Pathways to replicate its success in 5 other communities across Ontario and Quebec in 2007. Its volunteers and staff have built an organization from scratch, transforming a troubled neighborhood into one that offers a bright future for its children. And that's imagination, imagine innovation at its very best. As you can see, Canadians are certainly answering the call to service, contributing not only to our national well-being, but also to our economic well-being. The sector accounts for 7% of the GDP and 11% of the labor force in Canada, and these numbers continue to grow. This gathering, which follows discussions that took place across Canada, as Marcel has outlined just a moment ago, is a chance to celebrate the success we've had and also to learn how we can do better. The 4 priorities which have been set out at the summit are all vital to the sector's future, and I'm delighted to see these issues tackled openly and with such great enthusiasm. Il y a 2 mois, j'ai pris la parole.
2 months ago, I addressed the members of the Canadian Club of Vancouver, and there I outlined 10 challenges that we need to address, both as caring Canadians and as a caring society, to improve volunteerism and philanthropy in our country. Today, I'd like to focus on one of these points which will resonate during this summit: professionalism and recruitment. Or, to put it another way, good people with skills and common cause do great things. As this sector grows, we will increasingly need to rely on the skills of talented individuals who will look to their work both as helping out those in need and as building a viable and sustainable organization, or, to put that another way, good company and good causes work ordinary miracles. This being said, how do we attract and retain qualified and talented staff? No secret that many leave the voluntary sector to pursue careers in the private or public spheres, drawn away by promises of higher salaries and increased job security.
It has meant that organizations have had to work harder to retain those people who believed wholeheartedly in the cause they were serving. A shift, however, is beginning to take place. In a time of restraint, the nonprofit sector can now compete on a more equal footing with the public and private sector for seasoned talent, and especially for young people looking for a career after graduation. Imagine Canada is one organization that has developed ideas and introduced new policies on how to attract new recruits. My own perspective on how to retain knowledgeable and talented people mirrors the 7 drivers of change that Imagine Canada has laid out. One of these drivers calls for increased transparency, accountability, and communication of impact. Let me touch on each of these ideas briefly and how they can be used to help recruit employees and to retain them for the short and long term. Nonprofits must be transparent in their goals. A potential staff member will want to know exactly what the organization does, what its goals are, and most importantly, how he or she would fit in. What role would they play? What does the future look like for the organization? The more upfront an organization is, the more likely it will be able to recruit creative and committed personnel. Accountability follows transparency in recruitment. In the public sense, a nonprofit must be accountable for its expenses and how it delivers on its goals. In an internal sense, an organization must be accountable to its staff members, providing a rich and meaningful work environment. It must allow opportunities for its staff to learn, to grow, and to gain new skills, and this will benefit both the individual and the organization. This accountability to employees will ensure that for the short term, they will stay to contribute to the nonprofit. Finally, to ensure retention in the long term, we must look at the third point, communication of impact. After a project, a fundraiser, or an awareness campaign has ended, it's vital to do a post-mortem to assess the effect the initiative had on the organization's overall goal and how it moved that goal forward. In addition, it's important to acknowledge the success of individuals in the process. Recruitment, accountability, and communication of impact, if successfully executed, will build trust between the organization and the employee. I've touched on the idea of trust a number of times during the past year, speculating that trust between the organization and the community is important to fundraise and to advance its public profile. But the ultimate definition of trust encompasses 3 levels or concentric circles. At the core is the trust built between the organization and the public. There must also be trust between and amongst the organization's partners. And finally, internal trust between the organization and its staff must be solidified. In this way, we all become trust builders, relying on each level to strengthen the other. And if we look at so much of the trouble in the world today, it has as its roots a failure of trust. It's a concept that is often difficult to build over years and years of civilization and can be destroyed very quickly if the conditions begin to prevail that drag it down. People want to feel fulfilled in their careers, they want to believe in what they're doing, and they want to ensure that their contributions are not only valued, but have also been recognized as essential to achieving goals. In this way, staff members will be inspired to stay on and continue their work on behalf of the organization. The discussions you will have over the next few days will no doubt explore innovative ideas on how to attract and retain staff. It's my hope that these deliberations will also lead to a new definition of professionalism in the sector, which will reflect the changes occurring in our society. One way this is happening, which I'm delighted to see, is through the National Engagement Strategy introduced by Imagine Canada. Michel Gauthier, who serves as Vice President of Public Policy and Community Engagement at Imagine Canada, wrote that few of these issues can be dealt with in isolation. The strategy gives organizations the chance to collaborate on new ideas, to learn from each other, and to pool and share resources to accomplish their mandates. In coming together in this way, you are helping to define the professional conduct of nonprofits in the context of our evolving world. You're all aware of the change happening in the sector and in society. Both globalization and the recent economic turmoil, for example, present challenges and opportunities. Perhaps the biggest change, however, is the shift in demographies occurring in our country. Avec le vieillissement de notre population, nous devons trouver des moyens d'assurer la durabilité future à mesure que les chefs de file d'aujourd'hui se retirent du secteur bénévole. C'est la raison pour laquelle je suis convaincu que nous devons compter sur les jeunes qui nous prouvent déjà leur valeur. J'ai d'ailleurs rencontré
values that we've met throughout the country, people that have shown and have made exceptional efforts so that our country would be a benevolent country. And I've heard speak of others. Many youth have taken things in hand and are setting up organizations within their communities, and this at a very young age.
Organizations often have more success in meeting the needs of young people. Violetta Ilkik of the Laidlaw Foundation explored youth involvement in the non-profit sector and wrote, "Young staff members communicate more easily with other youth, understand their culture, create more appealing programs, and identify with youth issues more effectively, and often do it through social media very imaginatively." The youth-led sector, she argues, is no longer emerging, it's here. And we must embrace this sector. And I'm so delighted that there's such a substantial group of young people in attendance and involved here today. There are young leaders here who've already done so much in our society and who are looking for opportunities to do more. I think back to my first official visit to Nova Scotia and meeting the Membertou First Nation. They too adapted to change, offering a chance for Membertou youth to study in conjunction with Cape Breton University. They learn not only about math, science, and history, but also about their own culture and language, as well as to how to respect the land that they call home. They learn about the 400-year history of the Membertou, their struggles, triumphs, issues of the day, and how they can contribute in the future. The key to this success, I think, begins with the youth identifying their own place and taking pride in it. And by place, I mean not only their physical community, but their intangible values and culture, and then building that into another place of learning to develop the skills and knowledge to function well in a wider modern world. This is but one example of the evolution taking place in Aboriginal education, one that mirrors the evolution that we must be aware of in the nonprofit sector today. Let me speak just a moment about this concept of place, both physical and place in the sense of where one feels at home and where one can function most effectively. I recall when I was, I guess, the age of the youngest people in the youth group here, 18, I had grown up in a small Northern Ontario community, a very, very modest background, and I found myself in my first year at Harvard, a place that I came to call my beloved Harvard, but the first few weeks were a little on the difficult side, and they were because I felt very much like a fish out of water. I think the first essay I wrote in the first week or two I thought was Milton's Paradise Lost, and it came back with a D-. I didn't think they gave grades like D-, at least I hadn't seen any. And then I tried out for the Glee Club, and I had sung in a church choir and thought I could carry a tune. Well, the competitors, I think, were all recent graduates of the Metropolitan Opera. They could sing pretty well. And then I thought I was a pretty good high school quarterback, and I went out to the first practice of the freshman team, and the coach said, "All the quarterbacks get over there." And about 23 guys went over there, some of them pretty big. And he then attached a tire to the goalposts 40 yards down the field, 40 yards from where we're standing to the tire. And he said, "Throw the football through the tire." I couldn't throw a football 40 yards even with a hurricane behind my back and running at full speed. Guess what the first guy up did? He picked up the ball and hit the tire. And a few days after that, feeling really quite lonely, maybe lower than a snake's belly, I was just off Harvard Square, and I came to a lovely street and a magnificent home, one of those old New England-style homes. And there was one of these tourism signs at front, elegantly done, blue with gold or bronze printing on it, and said, "Henry Wadsworth Longfellow lived and worked here." I remember Longfellow. Gosh, Longfellow. I think I remember studying the Song of Hiawatha, a poem, epic poem, when I was growing up. So I went inside, and I learned the story of how Longfellow, this great Harvard professor, had written the Song of Hiawatha. Here's the story, and it has to do with place. Longfellow was traveling from Chicago on the Great Lakes steamer heading to the head of the lakes because he was doing some research on Native people. He got off at my hometown, Sault Ste. Marie, where I lived at the time, at the dock where the steamers would stop for half an hour Sunday noon to refuel before taking the last leg across Lake Superior. And as he was out on the dock, he fell into conversation with a man, his name was William Schoolcraft Johnston, no relation that I'm aware of, but he'd been the factor of the Northwest Trading Post in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. And Johnston had married an Ojibwe princess who spoke neither English nor French, but he spoke Ojibwe, and from her he had taken down in longhand the oral history of the Ojibwe people. Longfellow didn't get on the steamer to go back to the edge of the lake. He stayed with the factor of the Northwest Trading Post for 3 days and then picked up the steamer on the way down and had these magnificent notes of the Ojibwe people. And from that composed the epic poem, the Song of Hiawatha, which begins by the shores of Gitchigumi, by the great sea waters, and that, of course, was Lake Superior. And all of a sudden, I thought, that's my hometown. That's where I came from. And this great Harvard professor was sufficiently motivated, enthused about it, that he wrote one of the great poems in North American literature. And it caused me to look a little more into the history of my hometown, and I learned that it's believed at one point prior to the arrival of the Europeans, it was the largest First Nation settlement in North America because it's a 26-foot drop from Lake Superior into Lake Huron, the St. Mary's River, and the whitefish are abundant. And the native people would go into the rapids with nets at a certain time of year and would net the fish in abundance, and it was their protein supply for a year. And all of a sudden, I had a sense of place, a physical place, a sense of history. And I got to tell you, mighty Harvard got a whole lot better after that, and it was a wonderful 4 years. We must begin the process of passing the torch to the next generation, imparting the lessons we've learned over time and preparing them to take on a bigger role in the coming years. Les gens qui sont parmi nous aujourd'hui.
The young people today have all proven themselves to be caring individuals, to have the best interests of their friends and neighbors at heart. They are the future of this third sector, and we should listen to what they have to say. We have to encourage more young people to enter the non-profit sector as well, just as we have to encourage business leaders, public figures, new Canadians, and others to enter this sector. The answer to the question of why we should build a career, a life in the non-profit sphere is a simple one. In today's society, a career in the non-profit sector is both altruistic and practical. There is such potential for growth and potential for enacting real change to improve our society. Here, you can make a difference in Canada and chart the course for a future that is both smart and caring. And the difference is to change the culture of our country. La différence peut changer. J'aimerais vous dire un dernier mot, vous donner une dernière histoire. Vous l'avez peut-être déjà entendue, mais je vous la raconte, surtout pour les jeunes.
It has to do with the experience with Mother Teresa, that now sainted woman who was in Montreal some 25 or 30 years ago at a Greater Montreal prayer breakfast. And a group of us, 50 or so, gathered with her after the breakfast. And one of our friends said to her, Mother Teresa, we're so moved by your work in Calcutta, what can we do to help? And I, being a university president of some years, thought she would say, well, send a large check to me and we'll use it in our settlement in Calcutta. She did not. She said, look in your own neighborhood. Look in your own community. I guarantee you on your street there's someone who needs your love and care. It's very moving to me. But then one of the newspapers, in providing an account of her visit in her words, said, you know, she's an admirable person. She's probably going to be sainted by the Catholic Church, and she was. But let's be practical. She works in Calcutta. It's a city of 25 million people. More than half live below the most wretched poverty standard you can imagine. And she helps 150 people. That's important, but it's a drop in the bucket. It's just a drop in the ocean. And so that notion of physical limit was very much in my mind. I hadn't heard Nathaniel's poem at that point about breaking the barriers of limits. And I thought, well, yeah, how do you scale it up? And that bothered me for some time until a few years later, we'd finished a birthday party in our home. And we had 5 daughters in 7 years, so birthday parties were a big deal. And the girl said to me at the end of one of the birthday parties, Dad, you know the ghost stories you tell at the birthday parties? They're all lies, you know. The kids know they're all lies. And they only pretend to be scared because they know your feelings will be hurt if they don't show that they're scared. Why can't you be like Dean McFarlane? And I thought, Dean McFarlane was Andy McFarlane, who was the Dean of Journalism at the University of Western Ontario, where I was Dean of Law. And I thought, gosh, what's so smart about you, Andy McFarlane? So I went to a birthday party at the McFarlane home a few weeks later, and lo and behold, there was Andy McFarlane, dressed like, my kid says he does magic. Dean McFarlane does magic. Why can't you be like Dean McFarlane? Here he was, dressed like a musician, big top hat, flowing robes, big mustache curling out like that, magic baton, and he was doing magic to these little 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds. And one of the tricks was he reached in a drawer and he came up with a glass of clear water. And he says, what do you think this is? Oh, it's water. And he says, I will turn this water into wine. And I thought, my gosh, Andy, you're getting illusions of grandeur. That happened 2,000 years ago with someone who had a little more influence than you do. So he was whirling around, and I seated myself behind him so I could watch what he was doing with his hands. And he had a little eyedropper, with a drop of red vegetable coloring in it. And unbeknownst to the kids, he dropped that one drop of vegetable coloring in that glass of water, and then presented it to him. They saw the drop, and they uttered the magic formula of the abracadabra set, shaking it around. And of course, the one drop diffused through the entire glass. And it turned that clear liquid into a beautiful shade of rosé. And I thought, you know, that's Mother Teresa's one drop. And my limitation is I was looking at it from the point of view of physics, physical volume in a glass of water, when I should have been looking at it as chemistry, of changing the whole material in that glass of water. In other words, changing the entire culture. So that one drop, properly composed, properly moving, properly motivated, can change an entire culture. This summit is the next step of the evolution of the nonprofit sector. Let us see how we can maintain this momentum in the future, and how this summit can lead to concrete action that will redefine the professional nature of this sphere. Let me leave you with the words of one of my predecessors, Lord Byng, who once said, be as big, with minds as large, and souls as great as the land in which we live. Thank you, Missy.
So the Governor General has agreed to answer a few questions, so I'd like to invite Marina Boulot, CEO of the Foundation of Greater Montreal, to ask the Governor General a few of the questions that have come in from online and in-room participants. So ladies and gentlemen, Marina Boulot.
Sorry about that. Hello. Hello, Your Excellency. We have a few questions from people who wrote in, and the first question is online from someone from Peterborough, Ontario. What was your most memorable experience as a volunteer?
What was my most memorable experience as a volunteer? There were many. Let me choose one. I had the great privilege of co-chairing Sontrade Montreal in 1995, and I thought I knew my community, Montreal. I thought I knew it pretty well. I didn't. And as I began to visit the areas of need, it was a bit like that drop of red dye in the glass. It transformed my view of my community. One quarter of young boys, young males, age 5, age 6 in East End, Montreal, who present themselves for school unable to learn. Their home conditions, their early preparation has just been such that they can't learn in the conventional sense. And I think I had those experiences over and over again, and I think it drove home to me that you can live in a very isolated way and you are cut off of the real needs of your community. That was a Mother Teresa moment for me.
Next question is, young leaders are often frustrated with the systems, hierarchies they are working in. How can we create change from within before they leave to start their own initiatives or leave the social change sector altogether?
Well, that's a very profound question. How does one deal with a stifling bureaucracy? How does one get innovative? I spent the last 12 years in Waterloo County, which is known for technology innovation, BlackBerry and so on. And one of our aspirations, Rosemary Smith, is there. Rosemary, stand up so we just recognize you. Rosemary is the president of the Waterloo Community Foundation. One of the things that Rosemary and other great fellow travelers worked on is how do we make that community as innovative socially as it is technologically? How do we take the gifts of technological innovation and bring them over into the social sector? I used to give a speech called What's in the Water in Waterloo, and the first slide was a slide of the Grand River which flows through our community. The second slide was a slide of a Mennonite barn raising exercise. We live in a farm just outside of the village of Heidelberg, surrounded by Mennonite neighbors. And the third slide was the second slide and the first slide. It was the barn raising. And the beauty of barn raising, which goes right back to our pioneer roots, but exists today, is you learn how to collaborate with different people with a range of talents and a range of skills, etc., for a common purpose, and that, of course, is getting the neighbor's barn up. But no barn is the same. The materials aren't the same. It does take that sense of innovation and ingenuity on the individual's part, but it also takes that great sense of collaboration and teamwork, how you learn to work with different people. So that's an example from the community with respect to social innovation. I think for individuals, it's perhaps one of the most difficult things to learn is how do you move forward when the conditions aren't perfect, when you don't have that 40-mile-an-hour wind at your back and a chance to run 20 yards before you throw the football. I think you constantly have a sense of what the end goal is. You constantly have a sense of what the strengths and limitations of those around you are. And sometimes those bureaucracies get a little more penetrable as you go along. And then you figure out the ways that with like-minded people you actually overcome those things. It takes some patience, but it takes a great deal of tenacity. And that ability to find one's way through constraining circumstances is very important. The other thing I would say, if this question comes from a young person, remember the courage of the innocent. You haven't learned that you can't do it, and so you can.
All right, next question. Given the many years you have spent working in post-secondary institutions, do you have any more thoughts on how we can get a career in the nonprofit sector on the radar screen of Canadian students?
What a good question. How does one get a career in the nonprofit sector before Canadian students? Well, one is gatherings like this, I think, and spread the word. Secondly, I think in our post-secondary institutions, we could do more to teach the third sector, to actually get at the scholarly aspects of it, the innovative aspects, and how we do it better. A third would be by volunteering or doing these not-for-profit kind of things in your young years. There are hundreds of great organizations in universities and colleges that are just crying out for the talent and the energy of young people. That, I think, is a good way of testing the waters. At Waterloo, we had a number of we had a number of students who would spend a co-op term in one of the charities or working on United Way, and I would meet with a number of these students at the end of their term, and they'd be blown away about, one, how interesting the work was, and two, how fulfilling it was. A completely different experience. Let me just relate one other story that's not directly on working in the nonprofit sector, but it's working for government. But I think it applies. So many of you in this room would know Kevin Lynch, the outstanding clerk of the Privy Council until 4 or 5 years ago. Kevin was very focused during his time on the rejuvenation of the public service, and he was concerned that traditionally there had been a few universities that specialized in producing people for the public service, and there was a kind of a direct connection between them and the public service. They wrote the examinations, they did well. But there was a vast array of other universities and colleges that didn't participate in this transition because it was not on the radar screen, a career in the public service. So he organized a 2-day fair, expose of life in the public service at our university, Waterloo, and we joined Laurier and Guelph and Conestoga College in it. We had about 1,200 or 1,300 students attend, and I think about 800 of them received offers, solicited offers and received offers of employment. And for 2 days, deputy ministers and associate deputy ministers told about how excited they were to work in the public service. And in my discussions with the students, there were 3 things they said that were startling. One was the range of careers available in the public service. The second was how quickly responsibility was available, that young people advance very quickly to very responsible things. And thirdly, how good it was, how idealistic was the particular pursuit, as seen through the eyes of these people who came to speak to them about their passion for working in the public interest. And I think that same story would apply to the third sector. So I think those of us who know the passion and the fulfillment that comes from doing the kind of work you do, have an obligation to make that world open to younger people to at least examine it as a career path.
All right, more questions? Do you have any suggestions for how our sector should embrace and support Canada's First Nations as part of the need to build a future Canada, our national place?
What a serious and thoughtful question. We're seeing the dilemma at Ottawa-Piscat today of terrible conditions that I don't think any of us would tolerate in any other country in the world, and yet we tolerate here. I've long thought that the plight of our Aboriginal First Nations people is both our most important domestic issue and in many ways our most difficult foreign policy issue, because this is a country that has a great sense of equality of opportunity and people living in some degree of comfort and promise, and that certainly isn't true in many of the First Nations communities across the country. So what do we do about it? Well, first of all, I'm very encouraged by the leadership of Sean Atleo, the Grand Chief of the First Nations at the moment, and his focus is so much on the future and education. And that's so aligned with a fundamental Canadian value. Canadians, I think, have worked harder at equality of opportunity than any society in history, and yet we got this great failure. The lack of opportunity for First Nations people, and you know all the statistics. So that's a gap that we really have to work very hard to fill. How do we do it? I think by reinforcing the kind of leaders that Sean Atleo is, also by remembering both that Membertou story that I told you and my own story about Longfellow, that it's important that our First Nations people, especially the young, have a sense of their place, who they are, and why their culture is important, and why their values mean something. And with that sense of confidence, then to go ahead and to develop the necessary skills, education, so that they can function in a very different world than their traditional world. It's a very challenging exercise of marrying the best of the old and embracing what is new. But it behooves all of us, I think, not to treat that set of issues as something that's remote. It's really in the very heart of Canada, and it really speaks very stirringly to this question of, are we a nation that truly believes in equality of opportunity or not?
Here's a question online from Sudbury. It's hard to find time to innovate when we are funded from project to project. How do we encourage funders to support capacity building within our organizations?
We all know that, don't we? Well, I suppose one answer to that is the very theme of professionalism and recruiting and bringing into our organizations talented people who can wrestle with that dilemma. We all know it's so much easier. It's never easy to find money for good things, but it's easier to find money for the particular project and not the ongoing existence of the organization. One finds that in a university. I guess I've been fundraising for a long time. My tombstone will read Luke 7:13. And if you know your New Testament, that reads, "And it came to pass, the beggar died." Or it may read, "I told him I was sick." It is so easier, again, in a university to raise money for the specific, immediate kind of projects and not for the core activities. I think it's just a constant effort to be sure that those who are disposed to support our sector understand that one needs the basis, one needs the foundation if one is going to be able to do the very specific things. And again, to demonstrate through this notion of trust in the organization that it is well run, that it is open and transparent in what it does and says, that yes, one does have to have some professional staff that keep the lights on and keep the records going if one is going to be able to do the more specific, innovative things, and to take a very long-term view of that.
One of the challenges with hiring and retaining good staff is the expectation in the media and some in the public that staff in the sector should be working for minimum wage or less. How do we change these attitudes?
Let me give two answers to that very good question. I love telling stories, and I would have told more, but time is constrained. But when I'm speaking about professionalism, I remember one of my first revelations of that. I was, I think, 14, and I played hockey in Sault Ste. Marie. You learn to skate before you learn to walk in Sudbury and Sault Ste. Marie. And I played for a team in the east end of the city, and it was not a team that had any support. So all my equipment was second hand or third hand or seventh hand. And to go into the playoffs, I was picked up by a team from the other end of the city, a team that actually went on to win a Ontario Juvenile Championship, a very good team. And I came into the dressing room for the first practice with this new team, and I dumped my bag out on the floor, and they actually had a trainer. I'd never seen a trainer before, equipment man. And he just started to shake his head like that. And I thought, holy smokes, I haven't even got on the ice yet. This guy's shaking his head that I'm not measuring up. And he said, what garbage dump did you get that garbage from? I said, that's my equipment. He says, yeah, it's garbage. He says, come with me. And he went to the dressing room, and it had a sign up that said, treat them like professionals, and they play like professionals. And then he suited me up with the equipment, and I think my game enhanced by about 60% as a result of that. Now, this was all donated equipment, but this was a team that had high aspirations, and so it treated people like professionals. The second thing I would say is my definition of leadership is recognizing your total dependence on the people around you. And bear in mind, you as the leader are the person who often recruit or retain and develop those people. And in doing so, you have a responsibility to see that they are adequately compensated for what they do. And that, again, brings us back to the question just before, how does one go about finding the resources to be able to be sure that one can remunerate people adequately so that they can hold a position in our sector, the not-for-profit sector, and still raise their families, etc. It's a challenge of leadership, I think, but it certainly isn't appropriate, I think, to treat those people like raw amateurs and have them playing with equipment that is not going to permit them to achieve the kind of goals that you want.
Okay, I believe this is the last question from online, from Alberta. What are the best ways to engage the young leaders at an organization with both financial and time constraints? A little similar theme here.
I suppose call on their ingenuity. I mean, every organization has financial and time constraints, doesn't it? We only have 24 hours in the day. We only have so much budget. We have so many aspirations. It's Browning, I think, let your reach exceed your grasp, or what's a heaven for. I think we call on the ingenuity of our people. My colleague, who is the Secretary in the Office of the Governor General, Stephen Wallace, sitting right there behind the camera. Stephen, raise your hand, please. is a brilliant person in this respect and many. Stephen came into the job on February 1st, and what he did was conducted a strategic review of the Office of Governor General, which had never, so far as we can tell, been done, because it's a very traditional office, and I guess you just follow tradition. But I think Stephen was attempting to answer that question with all of the staff involved in the exercise of how do we look at what the core mission and missions are of the institution. How do we develop focus around those initiatives that are most appropriate to carrying out that mission? And how do we modernize our operations to make the very best we can of both limited time and limited resources financial? So my short answer is you call upon the people who make up the organization and attempt to look at it strategically and get their sense of how one operates within the constraints and makes those constraints go even further. Guess what happens? There's a tremendous esprit de corps that, yeah, they actually understand that there are 24 hours in the day and that we only have so much budget and we can only do so much. How do we rejig the work so that we accomplish our goals even more effectively than we thought we could within the constraints we have?
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. That's it for the questions. So I'll let Nathaniel. Thank you.
I would now like to invite Chris Cummings, a young leader from the United Way of Cambridge and North Dumfries, to officially thank the Governor General on behalf of all of us summit participants. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Cummings.
Good morning. This young leader tag is a bit of a dangerous thing. I remember filling out the registration form and seeing the little box that said, check here if you're under 35. And I thought, this is a trick question. And it turned out to be. In all sincerity, it is a privilege for me to be here today to participate in this way. And it has been our privilege to welcome and to hear from His Excellency Governor General David Johnston. His Excellency has included learning, philanthropy, and volunteerism among the key themes in his mandate as Governor General. And many of us have witnessed him demonstrate his commitment to these priorities in his actions. In the last 12 months alone, he has opened national conferences and events for Community Foundations of Canada, Imagine Canada, Philanthropic Foundations of Canada, United Way Centraide Canada, and Volunteer Canada. It's interesting to note that all are voluntary organizations for or about community participation and community benefit in Canada. Today, we've heard His Excellency speak of the importance of taking action to recognize and solve problems and the relationship of community participation and resulting community wellness. Our Governor General offers Canadians and all of us in our sector a call to action: to give, to participate, and to innovate. These are three themes that speak to the heart of most of our work in this sector. There is no doubt that we are a diverse sector, and at the roots of our efforts lay shared principles and promises to our communities. They are often represented as a commitment to the betterment of an inclusive common good. We offer people the opportunity to voluntarily give and participate, to communicate to community, to contribute to community, to improving lives, to the environment and arts and culture, whatever part of the common good that is meaningful to them. We help Canadians mobilize their caring power. And innovation is something that we're capable of doing as well. Community benefit organizations, large and small, are entrepreneurial by nature. We are called by community to improvise and be responsible to lead change and find new ways to benefit society and people. Responding to this call to action is what we are here to do. It will require adaptive leadership, or to paraphrase His Excellency, good people with common cause doing good things. For instance, we're talking about the trend that people in communities are less likely to be loyal to individual organizations or brands, but perhaps no less likely to be loyal to contributing to their community and contributing to the issues that represent their motivation towards a common good. We will need to work differently to continue to offer Canadians opportunities to get involved in the issues and their communities in the ways that matter most to them. Close relationships and engagement with Canadians may be our best opportunity to demonstrate accountability and trust. You trust somebody that you know. Our sector, at its best, entirely focused on community benefit, is the greatest voluntary force for common good that Canadians share. We have from His Excellency and the national organizations convening this summit both an aspiration and an opportunity to adapt and transform to address four of the greatest challenges that affect our sector. Through shared purpose and leadership, and maybe a little time, no doubt we will. Let's now thank His Excellency for his call to action and inspiration.